Welcome to a very special event, a tribute to Mr. Rahul Bajaj by his three children, Rajiv, Sanjiv, and Sunaina. Mr. Bajaj, as we all know, was a national icon, a public figure, the person behind Hamara Bajaj, and the chairman emeritus of the Bajaj Group. Today, his children will share special memories of him, and it's a very poignant moment because we're here to discuss his book, which has been written by my mother, Dr. Geeta Piramal. So I would like to introduce myself as a writer and a columnist, Aparna Piramal Raje, but really I'm here on my mother's behalf. So Rajiv, you are the managing director of Bajaj Auto, which is today not one of, but the world's largest and most valuable scooter companies. Sunaina, you are a gallerist and director of the Kamal Nayan Bajaj Gallery in Mumbai. And Sanjiv, you're the chairman and managing director of Bajaj Finserv. All three of you are keeping this legacy of Mr. Bajaj alive. So Rajiv, I'll start with you. You've worked with him for 30 years, you overlapped. And you started off on the shop floor, in manufacturing, which is something you wanted. But that was also perhaps something he wanted, to make sure that you understood the business from the ground up. What was it like? Take us back to that time.
So I joined in 1990, December 1990. I don't think my father ever told me what to do. So if I chose to start work on the shop floor, that was my choice. I think the good thing was I had nothing in common with my father. He was trained as a lawyer. He had studied economics. He had been to business school. I did not have such an elegant education. I was a mechanical and manufacturing engineer. So I was a mechanic compared to him. He was a manager. So if he was in the office, I was on the shop floor. If he dealt with numbers, I dealt with components. So we had a very complementary relationship, So I remember that the first few years, the first 5 years specifically, that I really enjoyed applying everything I had learned to the shop floor at Bajaj Auto. There is nothing more gratifying for an engineer than to be able to translate what you have learned into something that actually tangibly happens with machines and components and motorcycles and things like that. And I would revel in going to his office maybe twice, thrice a week and say to him, come with me, I have something to show you. And to be honest, he was not a product person or production person, but he never said no. He always went along with me, even if in his safari suit, which was so trademark of him.
Yeah,
it was not very comfortable on the shop floor because it was hot and stuff like that. But he always came with me, and no matter how small the improvement was, he was always very appreciative of that. So that is how I started, and that's kind of, I would say, my first working memory of myself and my father.
But that's a lovely memory. And the story I've also heard is how much you wanted to make sure that you had to prove yourself in the business, that you really knew what you all were talking about. Was that part of the folklore also?
See, if he wanted that, that is something only he can say. I don't know. But I can tell you this, I was not the child that was going to be told what to do. So I was clear I had to chart my own path. And to that extent, I would say I did my own thinking. I went with my own initiative. But obviously he was the boss, so I went back to him with ideas or with questions. And I enjoyed seeking his counsel and his advice. So, but yes, it was important to him that we work our way up. It's not that we walked in at the age of 25 and were made directors of the company. So I was put through my paces for the first 5 years in manufacturing, then 5 years in product development, then 5 years in marketing and sales, before I was given any significant overall responsibility. But at each stage, it was something I wanted to do. And that's how it should be, because then you have no one to blame, right? If things go well, you feel good, and if they don't, you don't have a father to blame.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think it has to be a symbiotic relationship in in any sort of parent and sibling relationship, parent and child relationship, and it obviously evolves over a period of time. So I want to fast forward a little bit, Sanjiv, to you at Bajaj FinServ. Of course, people associate Bajaj Auto very clearly with Mr. Bajaj. But for you, what was the role that he really played in getting this business, which has become so successful now?
It was sometime around 2005. I was very much in Bajaj Auto running exports, where a large number of outside investors, well-wishers, the media kept telling him that, while you've got a large Bajaj Auto, you also have these budding companies in financial services, two insurance companies at that time, Bajaj Auto Finance, that existed then, and saying that over a period of time, as these get bigger, it'll get more difficult for us to value these businesses because they're all in one pot. Investors also said that, some of us may want to just invest in the auto business, others in the financial services business. So why don't you break these up? And he used to say that, yeah, it's important, but not urgent. But in the background, a few of us started working in looking at what the details would be for the demerger process. And in FY 07-08, we underwent the demerger process and created the financial services independent structure. He was quite confident that with India growing in those years at 8-9%, financial services would provide an interesting new opportunity. It took a while for him to get convinced because, he was always focused on sticking to what he did best. But over a period of time, he realized that financial services could provide a good opportunity. I had worked 10 years at Bajaj Auto. It was getting to that. Rajiv was firmly in the saddle over there. And I saw this opportunity to take these companies, which had already existed, and build those out. So in many ways, it was this entrepreneurial rush that came in. And because my father was not an expert in financial services, he decided to ask our uncle, Nanu Pamnani, who had only recently retired from Citibank, if he would mentor me, help us build the business. And Nanu was more than happy to do so. So he found somebody who understood this world very well and who was willing to give time and be there behind us as we went out to build the business. And that's how by end of 2007, I had moved to financial services to start building it out.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty strategic move at the beginning to find a resource and somebody who could, you would trust and who could build it out. I mean, have you found him doing these kind of calls all throughout in terms of building the businesses?
Across the financial services businesses, the role that my father played was one, whenever in the initial years we interviewed senior people to hire, he interviewed them as well. And his style was very different because he used to tell them upfront that, if you're sitting here across me, then everybody else has already asked you about your educational background, your experience, financial services, capabilities. My interest is to know how you will fit in over here. Will you fit into our culture? What are your values? How's your family taking this decision? You need to move to Pune. Financial services, most people were in Mumbai or Delhi. But he brought in this very unique perspective into the interviewing process, and he used to provide us with those insights which we had not thought of because we were just looking at these individuals for their capability and experience in helping us build business. In the same way, we used to quarterly, he was chairman of these companies for many years, we used to quarterly take him through a very detailed review of how the business was doing. It typically went on for 3-4 hours or so with the top 20 people in the company presenting to him. And he had this ability to connect with each one of them. And he also had this very interesting way where he used to go and pick up issues which were not necessarily something that we would have looked at from a financial services perspective, but which were often very relevant and made us think through again if we were taking the right decisions. And this is what my team used to tell me after the first year or two of reviews. And I used to ask them that, do you really want to attend this review? And people used to be very happy to be in those reviews, because they said, first, his personal connect with each one of us is special. And second, he sometimes provides insights, or he asks us those questions which the rest of you all have not asked us. So they used to enjoy those reviews as well. So this was his way of adding value, of being meaningful, knowing very well that this was not his area of professional expertise.
Wow, so that's a really interesting learning for how you can actually have two consecutive successes, when something that is in your domain area, and even as you said, Rajiv, it was not perhaps making vehicles, was perhaps not something that he, grew up knowing about, and then getting into financial services. So ultimately, does it come down to really the values, the people, the culture, the emphasis on certain things, like the frugality that I've seen when I've interacted with both of you. So is that what really differentiated him and made him so successful in both these two very different businesses? Either of you could.
No, I don't think so. I think, of course, the culture, values, and all of that is very important. But I think what really defined him, and I think Sanjiv referred to that, was his razor-sharp focus. To do one thing at one time really well. It's that 10,000 hours of expertise that people talk about now. And I remember in those years, in the 90s, ever so often we would hear him talk about, how his friends would advise him to diversify into one area or the other, because Bajaj Auto had been so successful, he had so much cash at his disposal, he had a great reputation. So why not do this and that and everything in between? And he was very clear. He said that diversification and fragmentation are two sides of the same coin. A lot of people under the garb of de-risking are actually running a huge risk of becoming the jack of all trades and master of none. And that in a very, very competitive marketplace, you will pay the price for that eventually. And that's happened, right? A lot of so-called business groups that have stretched themselves across different sectors have gone nowhere really with that, So I think first and foremost, what was very important about him was his focus on excellence, on being world-class, best in class, and putting every man, every minute, and every rupee behind that effort. And the second, yes, values, etc., important. I would say the word that describes it best is integrity, because so many times we heard him say, even at the end of an AGM speech, at the end of the day, I want to sleep well. So a holistic definition of integrity, integrity at work, integrity in personal life, walking the talk, leading from the front, this was important. And I would say the third thing, and again, I think in a way Sanjiv described it, was teamwork. He always thought about family. He had lots of friends, more than 3 of us put together. He was very popular, let's say. In industry circles, whether it was CII, Davos, etc., he was a permanent fixture, so to speak. In politics, he loved meeting all kinds of people from various parties. He loved his tenure at the Rajya Sabha. Even the so-called Bombay Club was a team. Whatever it was a team of people. So he was a very team person. I think to these 3 aspects of him, focus, integrity, and being a team person, I think to me, these were the pillars of his success.
If you want to add to
that?
Yeah,
no, I will just add to that. These 3 points are very 3 clear points. Fourth was passion. Whatever he did, he only did if he was passionate about it. And he used to tell me that at times. He said, and I think he's told that to each one of us. He says, do whatever you're passionate about, but then try to be the best in what you do. And that stood for everything he did. Whether it was, I remember 7 or 8 years ago, I mean, he used to ride a scooter for a very long time. And 7 or 8 years ago, he again once said, I want to try and ride a scooter. And all of us had to tell him, no, no, this is not the time. You don't want to fall and break something. Or I've been with him to Davos so many years, many of the CI meetings. Each of those activities that he got involved in, very passionately, very detailed. He was also full of life. I remember till 3 or 4 years ago, when we used to be in Davos, he used to be out till 1, 2 in the morning and out at dinners, there were 1 or 2 places where everybody used to congregate like a disco. He was full of life.
He used to be out dancing with your mother.
Yeah, well, that's what she keeps saying.
And then at 7 o'clock, he was there in the morning meeting. You know, I could not get up half the time.
I mean, the book has so many references to him dancing. But it was very interesting you mentioned the point about passion, because in the book, my mom writes that Kamal Nayan has actually said that to him, that whatever you do,
Correct.
you do it with passion, you know, whatever you want to be in life. So I'd like to bring you into the conversation, Sunaina. And there's a lovely quote by Ratan Tata in the book, where he says that whoever would have thought that the quiet, well-behaved boy who sat in the corner of the classroom in Cathedral School would become such a flamboyant and successful scooter king. Rahul's success had made us, all of him who know him, to be proud to be his friend, even if you have to be the butt of his jokes. And the empire which he has built will not only be his legacy to his future generations, but to the nation. So I want to just talk about this side of him, which is fun-loving, you know, loves dancing. Did you see a lot of that at home, or was he was also working very hard, and he himself writes that, you know, I didn't get to spend enough time with the kids when they were growing up, but maybe he got to see a lot more of the grandchildren. So what was his sense of humor and this aspect of him?
So when he was here in India working, it was very much work focused, and you know, we didn't see that side of him. But whenever he traveled abroad, Davos, or we did holidays abroad, it was a whole different him. I think he just felt he could let his hair down and be himself, very witty, fun-loving, people's person. So we always went in large groups with a lot of friends or family, and that's where I saw this side of him. Dancing away, he was so graceful, and he had no inhibitions dancing. He would twirl anybody on the dance floor, and I used to feel very shy. I mean, he would take me a couple of times, and I really didn't know how to react, but I got used to it over a period of time. But constantly when we were abroad, he would be planning his every meal and what he had to see in great detail. Everything was very done in great detail and planned from before. And yeah, he was just the life of the party wherever he went. I mean, any room he went, I think he would hold his darbar, and he would just light up the room.
Yeah, that's a perfect word, really. And he had these one-liners, right? The book is full of these one-liners. For example, he says that I'm ready to go to jail for excess production, just as my parents went to jail for the freedom struggle. And there are lots of these. So did he have these kind of one-liners at home also? And
well, there are a lot of his quotes about, do what you want, but be the best at it, be passionate. That you can't build private heavens and public hell. I think that was so telling. And the world needs more of a hybrid between a yogi and an entrepreneur. You know, there were so many of these quotes, and very often when I'm doing something or thinking of something, it comes back to me. I'm always thinking of what he would do in a particular situation, or what he would tell me to do, or what he would expect of me. You know, and so he was so right in the way he thought and the way he went about things. So these are things.
So such a towering personality in so many ways, force of nature. This is what people say about him. A slightly theoretical question, perhaps, but where did this come from? Where does he come from? Was this the upbringing, the family, the era, the circumstances, his own nature that he was gifted with?
I don't think it was the era or the family, because if it was the era or the family, then all of us should have turned out like that.
Yeah.
You know, but I don't think my uncles turned out like that, and certainly I didn't. So I don't think it was that. I mean, you're right. It is a theoretical or philosophical question, and you know, in life you learn that there is no right or wrong. There's no absolute right or wrong. Each person's truth is based on that person's perception, based on your pattern. That is why they say when three people see a dog, one feels love, one feels fear, and one feels hungry, right? The dog is the same. Uh, so one person's excellence is another person's mediocrity. One person's opportunity is somebody else's challenge or obstacle. So I think everybody is unique, and he was unique in his own way. And there was something about him which was innate to him, to his pattern, that made him respond or react as he did. Now, what was that? To me, one of those elements is he was very clear about what he was not. See, a lot of us are focusing on what we are, what we want to do, etc. He was very clear about what he was not. So you made the point, for example, that he once said that if I have to be penalized for producing more than what I have been approved to produce in terms of capacity, I am willing to go to jail for that, just as my forefathers went to jail for the freedom struggle. So what does that tell you about the person? Not just that he's courageous or belligerent almost, but what it tells you is that when he sees or when he believes in an open marketplace, when he believes in building a world-class company, then he is not going to accept even the highest authority of the land telling him that आप 1 लाख गाड़ी ही बना सकते हो, and you cannot make the 1 lakh and first vehicle. He is not going to accept that. So what is not acceptable was very clear to him. And that is why one of the many things that one could have learned from him, I'm not sure I have, is how to say no. Because for a person in his position, lots of people are asking him for lots of things all the time. And we face that, and then it's awkward. You don't know how to say no. You kind of end up being ambiguous, vague, or you end up being rude when you should not be, etc. You take it personally, perhaps. But he had this wonderful way of saying no in the nicest possible way, especially when he was clear that this is not for me. So I think he came from here, from this position, and to everything that he encountered in his career or through his life, I think this is the pattern from which he reacted.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to talk about self-awareness and, having that understanding of yourself as to what you stand for and what you represent and what you embody, and really having the stamina to stick to that and not change that. I guess the reason I was asking that question also is really, could somebody who's much younger look to him and say, look, I want to be a Rahul Bajaj, right? So one of the things that my mother writes in the book is that he was a textbook leadership case, as you might see in a business school. But often what you see in a business school in a textbook is not what you see in the practice. But he was actually, living this in the corporate world himself. Now, Sanjiv, somebody as you've been to Harvard. He was one of the first people to go to Harvard Business School. Do you see that lessons in leadership that you think can be replicated by not just others from the outside who might want to see, but also people from your own family, the younger generation, who might want?
What I found of him at work, actually it was true in everything he did. One, he was always thoroughly prepared. He never left work till his table was clear, and he never went to bed till he was fully ready for the next day. Even if it was 400 pages of documents for a board meeting the next day, if it was for an event he had to go and make a speech. So he was always thoroughly prepared. Second is, he could argue both points of view. And very often at work that used to exasperate us, because we had put forward a point of view, we knew this made sense, he would agree later on, but he had to put the other point of view also. And I can see over a period of time, it was to make all of us in the room make sure that we had thought through it properly. So he used to always argue the other point of view. And the third is that once he had evaluated what he thought were possible options and decided on one, he was very confident in how he went ahead and implemented that. And these are the typical things that we all learned in any good MBA school. But how he applied that was not in any textbook that you can learn. It came through his own experience. It came through, I think in his early years, he was born in 1938. He spent quite a few years in Wardha. He saw what was happening with Gandhiji, the freedom struggle. At some level, that probably played a role. He used to tell us how his own father, whenever he used to be in Pune, after dinner, the two of them used to sit for hours and talk about all kinds of issues. And my grandfather was again a very straightforward, bold person. There's an anecdote in the book where in the late 60s, after Indira Gandhi starts nationalizing banks, a whole bunch of people from the Congress, including my grandfather, move away. And he tells my father, because he was chairman of most of our businesses, and he tells him that, you know, we could face pushback from the government and your businesses could do that. And if you want to, I'm happy to step down as chairman and directors in all our companies. And my father said, no, you should do what you think is right, and if we have to suffer that, we will do so. So I think somewhere implicitly, explicitly, those engagements with my grandfather and with others around through that freedom movement, and later on his own experience helped build his own unique character.
And you think that unique character is something that you would hope to replicate in your life also, or do you think that's possible?
You know, each one of us are different people. I'm not outgoing as he is. I listen before I talk. He used to talk, but then he used to listen after that as well. But certain common elements, courage in your conviction, integrity, as Rajiv said, integrity across, not just in what you're doing at work and taking decisions, but just integrity of thought. Hard work, but hard work also in ways as I think is relevant. My father, till a very long period, he used to check what time we punched our cards at work, morning, evening. And every couple of months, he used to take out those papers and tell us these were the days that you went late. So to him, in that manufacturing setup, it meant you had to be at work before the start of the shift and at the end of it. Today, work is a lot more flexible. It has become virtual in the last few years. But yes, you work to what is required for the responsibilities that you take. So that honesty about your work and transparency in what you do, these are the elements which have stayed with me. Personalities, of course, we are each a different personality.
Sunaina, it's very clear in the book that your father was the patriarch and he held the family together. How did he do that when he had so many other demands on his time? And when I mean the family, I really mean the extended family as well.
Yeah. So, you know, everyone, when they think of Papa, they think of his aggressive, outspoken, determined, driven persona. But I don't know if a lot of people realize, but he was very large-hearted and very kind-hearted. And for him, his greatest joy was people, his family, his friendships, his relationships. That meant a lot to him. And no matter how busy he was, he always made time for everybody. If anyone reached out to him, had an issue, wanted to talk, he would always give a time. No matter which country he was in, where he was, he always got back. And one thing I've seen of him is no matter how many emails he got a day, messages, emails, phone calls, he always returned them immediately or replied to all the emails. It would be some random emails from people you didn't even know, just the general random ones. But he would make it a point to reply to those also, which I don't think most of us do over here. But that's one thing I saw him do. So he was very much, for him, connecting with people, be it family, be it close friends, be it the larger, the country at large. I mean, people just randomly outside. It was very important to him. And he always made time for everybody. And we all felt that we could reach out to him anytime. He may not be able to talk that very minute, but he would definitely call back before end of the day or next day at the latest. He had a list and he was very clear, his PA knew, and he would always get back. So he also did a lot of holidays together. You know, he would drive them. Diwali was always together with the entire family, extended family. He would plan many trips. Whenever he came to Bombay, where we were, we always had dinners organized. So he made sure he spent time with us that way, wherever he could.
I mean, I know my mother has been on some of these trips also and seen these relationships. She also talks about in the book about how the relationships spilled across all aspects of business, government, society, and Rajiv, you referred to that also. Really, do you think this whole idea of business being a larger force, not just something that is about the capitalism for a particular individual of a particular family, or looking at business as a larger force was something that he really represented? Would you agree with that? And is that, why was that important to him?
See, I would say that anything significant in life is not one-dimensional. If it's big enough, you will find everything in that one thing. I'll give you an example. When I joined in the 1990s, at that time we were still in a situation where demand was much ahead of supply. And actually that was my opportunity, because sometimes machines would not work, sometimes the labor was not cooperative, sometimes suppliers failed us. But at the end of the day, we could not produce what we needed to. So along with a bunch of engineers, if I could apply myself to that problem and improve productivity, let's put it like that, that really helped the company. So at a particular point of time, there was a lot of resistance, especially from the workmen, to these improvements in productivity, because the thought process always becomes that if this is beneficial to the company, what is in it for me? And what's the answer to that question? So I remember there was one incident sometime in the 90s, I don't remember exactly when, and this happened at the Aurangabad plant. And my uncle doesn't like my saying this, but in my opinion, Akudi was inefficient. Aurangabad was completely mismanaged, and to get that whipped into shape was a big task. But we were a determined lot of young chaps. So we precipitated the issue. So there was resistance, there was violence, and then there was a strike, And usually at that time, and this was not just typical to Bajaj Auto, this was very typical of industry in general, usually one would kind of, in the name of finding a middle path, find a compromise, because one wanted the show to go on, right? The demand was there and you just needed to supply. But I remember we had a Shiv Sena union, a BKS union that time. And when the matter was escalated to my father's level, I said to him very clearly that, you are not going to yield. It doesn't matter how long this takes, but we are going to send the right signal, set the right precedent. And he backed us 100%. Now, how is the problem going to be solved? The irresistible force has met the immovable object. So this is taken to Shri, to Balasaheb Thackeray. So all of us go there, the so-called management side and the so-called union side. And now we are all sitting in his antechamber, and Balasaheb is sitting there on his throne. Now what do you say? I mean, I asked myself then, what is it I would say to Balasaheb Thackeray? And what my father did was so smart. He didn't say anything else. He just said, here are the keys to the company. Aap hi manage kar lo. So this Sun Tzu's wisdom, that the first step to victory is to put yourself out of the possibility of defeat. He did that for himself and for Balasaheb, because there was no question of any confrontation. He's saying, "Aap chabi le lo, aap hi karkhana chalao," which obviously he cannot. I mean, the other side cannot do. And for Balasaheb also, this was not offensive, because here is somebody who is submitting actually to him. And immediately it was agreed that some people who had caused trouble, they would be dismissed from the service of the company, because that would send the right signal, and find a kind of permanent solution to the problem. But then, what my father did was to agree to give a auto rickshaw free to each of those people, so that they could earn a livelihood from tomorrow, so that their family would not suffer, So it's about doing the right thing. But in the present context, in the present times we live in, whether you are in India or Ukraine, I would also say it's about doing the right thing with a human touch, with a human face, with grace. You don't hurt someone. You do the right thing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody has to be hurt at the end of the day. So that was important. Um, so to answer your question, from a business point of view, it means that you must be competitive. You can't compromise on that because otherwise you cannot survive. From a government point of view, it means that government must be supportive. If Balasaheb Thackeray had not supported us that day, maybe Bajaj Auto would have, gone along a very different course, at least for some time. And thirdly, it also means, I suppose, that society must be progressive. You must understand that circumstances are bigger than you. And when things change, you have to adapt to that change. You can't expect the world to adapt to yourself. So I think in this one problem, we can see so many facets of business, of government, of society.
Yeah, it's got all the linkages, but it requires a certain amount of detachment to be able to make that statement from the problem. You know what I mean? If you're sort of deeply into it and you're coming into it with a lot of emotion, you wouldn't be able to make that statement.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, with everything, that is why if I may call him that, my guru, my homeopath, always says, don't react, respond. So there is something to be said for just pausing, taking a deep breath, exhaling, and then coming from a point of intellect rather than a point of ego, because we are all guilty of this. This is my identity. I am the managing director. I am responsible for this company, and I believe this is right, and hence, and that's where the problem lies. So I think to put yourself in the other person's shoe, and that's what I think my father did vis-a-vis Balasaheb Thackeray, and vice versa, I would say, because the two families have known each other for a long time and shared a very good rapport. So I think when they did that, they were teaching us how to deal with conflict.
Sanjiv, you want to say anything about conflict? Because when you speak to leaders, they often don't talk about this area, but it's something actually that we have to deal with. And what I've seen in the virtual world is that it becomes much harder to actually resolve conflict. But what have you learned about conflict resolution from so many years of being with your dad?
See, a number of issues. It's also how you approach conflicts, and in a little broader sense, for example, when the government mandated the 2% CSR requirement, he was one of the most vociferous opponents of it, saying that how can you mandate our conscience? Many of us are already doing a lot of social and charitable work. Why are you forcing this upon us? But once it became clear that it was going to go ahead, initially it was supposed to be voluntary, thereafter became mandatory, he ensured that that money was very well spent. Till recently, he chaired the CSR committees across our companies, and it was not just enough to spend that money. He made sure that the right areas of support were identified. He was not about spending the money just in flashy areas where he would get publicity. Instead, a lot of the work that we do, we don't even talk about that. He wanted to make sure that those NGOs, which did not easily get money from others but were doing good work, we would go and support them. He also was very clear that they must build their own capability for fundraising. And that's why after supporting for a few years, the message to them used to be that diversify your sources of funding. We are going to move onwards now. So trying to build capability even there. And while he disagreed with the government on this basic issue of mandating CSR, once he took it up, the social side of him came into play to make sure that that was again very well done. As far as in general handling conflicts was concerned, he had a style where, as you know, he used to speak first on the issue. But what I could see and what I picked up at least was hear both sides. Once you're clear on your point of view, be fair, but be firm. Once he had made a decision, unless you brought a new fact to him, he did not change his decision. He did not waver. And that sent a very clear message down the line over the years that once he had decided, it was time to implement and move on.
I mean, it's remarkably consistent, right? What he's been saying through the years, what he started off saying is what he sort of said for all his life, because that's there in the book also, be firm but fair, even when he was much younger. So one of the things I wanted to ask all of you also is that, we associate him so much with courage, but really from the times that I've been interviewing CEOs, what makes people seem really authentic and real is those moments of vulnerability, right? When they are willing to talk about the times when things have been really difficult. I know in the book we talk about sometimes when there's been a very major strike, and I think Rajiv, you were old enough at that time to remember it. But there were maybe other points which you have seen him going through some hard times. Can any of you share your experiences of how he tackled that and how what you've learned about him and about how to handle these moments?
Well, the thing about courage is, what is courage? The definition of courage I like is courage is the ability to ignore your options. You know, and I give you an example of the 80s when I was not part of the business, when Honda came to India or wanted to come to India, and I heard from so many people, including from my mother, from my father's one and only sister, who he was very close to, my bua, and from many others, that that was a time when he was very stressed, because the 500-pound gorilla of the motorcycle world was going to come to this market. In fact, I was told that the heart attack he suffered in 84 or 85 was perhaps something to do with that stress. So he was very stressed at that time. And as is well known, Honda shortlisted 3 potential partners. 2 of them were Kinetic and Hero, with whom they went eventually. But their clear preference was for Bajaj because Bajaj was the biggest, it was the market leader, so on and so forth. But amongst other things, as I understood, I mean, I cannot be 100% sure because I was not part of the discussion then. There were certain conditions. For example, one condition was that Bajaj cannot export, if it is to be a partner of Honda. And my father's point was that stuff that we make together, I can understand because you are a global company. But stuff that I make myself, how can you stop me from doing this? Now, most people at that time would have taken that option because if you have the option to exist in the Chhatrachaya of Honda, why would you not? And if I may say so, in terms of technology, quality, productivity, etc., global distribution, Bajaj Auto in the 80s was nothing compared to what it is today. But still, this man had the courage to ignore that option and to say, I am sorry, this is not right. Again, as I said to you before, he knew what he was not. He was not going to be cowed down into, painted into a corner and be told what to do and what not to do. So he gave up on that option that was forsaken. And he said to his team that, we redouble our effort to do even better. And what's the lesson to learn from that? For me is first and foremost my favorite marketing mantra, when in trouble, narrow your focus. That's what he did, that if trouble is going to come in the form of global competition, let's narrow our focus further, focus even more sharply on the existing business, let's scale up more than ever before, let's start exporting more than we have so far, etc. So he drove that. And secondly, you have to walk the talk, as we said earlier. You have to lead from the front. And that's exactly what he was doing. And perhaps that took its toll on him. But he was never one to shy away. As someone said, if you want to lead, the man who wants to lead the orchestra has to turn his back to the audience. And that's what he did. He didn't care what people were saying, that, the easy way out would be to just partner with a global leader and, then you're set for life. He turned his back on that. That is courage. And he led his orchestra, And I think we played some pretty good music after that.
I think so too. Sanjiv, Sunaina, you want to say something about this moment of having vulnerability, but yet drawing upon some sort of inner reserve to be able to overcome that?
Yeah, so I think my brothers can talk about the business parts of it because they have worked with him, closely on that. I would like to just say one situation which happened recently, about 7-8 years ago, 9 years ago actually, when my mom had to go for her second aortic valve replacement. I think it was a very hard time for Papa at that time. She was a very high-risk patient, and most of the institutions abroad, the Cleveland Clinic, a lot of hospitals he got in touch with, they said they couldn't do it, because she was just too high risk, and they were not confident of handling a case. And I saw in those 2-3 months, I mean, he made that his single most focus. He was so emotionally, affected by it, but I saw the way he worked towards finding the best place for her, the kind of research he did, the kind of detail he went into, very pragmatically, very optimistically, positively, and he found the best place for her. And I think for those 2-3 months, that's all he, ate, slept, talked, thought about. And but I didn't see him uh, very disturbed about it, though I knew there was a lot of internal turmoil going on. But the way he handled it and went about to give her the best possible care and the best possible facility with the best possible people, it was just amazing to see. I think he became half a doctor, knowing all the terminology of what would happen during a procedure, all the things that go into it. It was just so inspiring to see that.
Yeah. I definitely want to come back to your mother because she's such an important person. It also tallies with what Rajiv was just saying about the focus, right? That when you are pushed to the wall and you are really into that corner, that you really focus on what you want to do. Sanjiv, you want to say anything about this?
Just actually, my mother then unfortunately passed away in 2013, and that was a period when I saw him being vulnerable. Because she was his rock. And every evening when he was in town, they were in their own room. She used to be reading a book, watching a serial. He used to be on the phone talking to people or reading. But he used to be incessantly speaking to her about all kinds of things. And she would respond in monosyllables. She would argue sometimes, she would agree sometimes. But they had this intellectual equation, and there was somebody there with him. Also, given his lifestyle, travel, stress, he had always thought that he would go before her. That put him into a level of disbelief where we saw a vulnerable side of him. And since I stayed with him, I saw that for the first few months. He was lost for some point of time. We were all lost, but he was very clearly lost. And he spoke about it afterwards. But in his own self, he got out of it, got back to his normal life, got back to his travel, got back to living life his whole way. But I think there is something that he clearly, I mean, we all lost, but there's a very big part of him that he lost at that time.
Yeah. I think if I can say so, that happens to a lot of men that, they are not prepared. So we were talking about your mother, and it was interesting in the book that there's an anecdote about how she proposed to him, and that she just seemed to be this amazing person. She was willing to tolerate snakes in the house in the early days in Akurdi. Would you like to just share a little bit about her and their relationship?
I can start. Mummy and Papa were very well intellectually matched, but very different personalities. And I think she was the yin to his yang, really. And they had the same set of values, which I think was a very core, essential part of them, and the intellectual same wavelength, which held them in really good stead. And Papa would travel a lot, go all over, meet people, was such an extrovert, life of the party. And Mummy was very quiet, reserved, calm, but she was so solid. Like we all say, she was our rock. And
all of you have said that in the book, actually. All of you have used
she
that.
was. And the first, what I remember, the first 15, 16 years of my life, and I was the youngest, I hardly interacted that much with my father because he was always working late or traveling. Mummy was always with us. She never left us to go anywhere. So all our moments, memorable moments, the first early years were all with her. And she was very protective and nurturing, and every need was taken care of, and mine more so. Being a girl, I think she felt extra protective towards me, or rather the boys wouldn't let her get away with them, but I didn't have a choice. So I got a lot of her attention, and their relationship was fabulous. I've yet to come across couples who have the kind of relationship they did and the understanding which they did. They were both very mature and wise. And Papa, no matter where he went and whom he met, he would come back at the end of the day and tell her all about it, what had happened, what was bothering him. I've been there so often in Pune when I would visit, I would be in their room till 1:32 at night, and he'd be talking and talking and talking, and she would just be calmly listening. At the end of it, like Sanjiv said, she would just in one short sentence or a few words, just tell him what she thought about it or what maybe he could do or think of, and that was it. He got his answers. And I think many a times he didn't really even need her to give an answer, but the fact that she listened to him, she was a sounding board and a calming effect on him. That's what she had. So growing up, I've seen so much of this, and even later, after getting married and visiting them, being with them, I've seen a lot of this. And even though she could not physically be with him everywhere, travel with him like he did, she was, I think, always with him. In his heart and his mind, she was always there with him.
That's amazing. That's really beautiful. Would you like to say anything more?
No, very much the same thing. I think growing up, she was this strict disciplinarian, and she also brought us up in a very middle class way, because that's the kind of family she came from. Highly educated. Father was in the civil service prior to independence, but middle class in values. And she insisted, I think it's in the book, that we go to the nearby school, which was run by these Swiss missionaries, high quality, but very simple. And I think that foundation played a very significant role, I believe, in all our lives. And at some point, once we were teenagers, her relationship changed, and I remember it quite clearly, to one of friendship. So, because I guess we had outgrown physically as well as mentally the ability to control, or she felt we didn't need that control anymore. And and then we would have a drink together. When we went out on holidays, she was a completely different person. She was this jovial, fun-loving person. She had these great jokes, and she had these one-liners herself, which would shock the other person. And the book talks about a wicked sense of humor that used to come out once in a while. So we saw this very different side of her, and that then stayed right through. She was always this calming person for us. I remember very often in the evenings after I'd worked out, she used to be in this cane chair outside her bedroom, and we used to just go sit there with her for a while, have a glass of coconut water, and chat about the day. And as Sunaina saying, even with my father, she just listened. And if she felt she needed to pass on a message, she did that. But very supportive, and played a very significant role in all our lives.
Well, we live in a world where reflexes are kind of a commodity right now. So listening is really an art form. So, yeah.
I'd also like to say one more thing. After Mummy's passing away, Papa was really lost for some time. And having said that, he never once made us feel that we needed to spend time with him, or he never once depended on us in the sense of telling us that we need to spend time with him or be with him. He was so pragmatic, and he handled it so beautifully. I remember Mummy, before she went for her surgery, she told me, and I think she told Sanjiv also, that in case I don't come back, please never leave him alone. He will feel very lost, so please make sure you're always with him. And I started calling him up regularly. And after 2-3 months of that, one day when I called him, he said, I'm okay. You don't need to take care of me. If you'd like to talk to me, that's great. I love to talk to you, but don't feel you have to do it, And ever so often, whenever we went on holidays, I started going on annual holidays with him every August, Europe or wherever he wanted to go. He would meet people, they'd ask about his wife, and he would say, he so often said, even to people he didn't know that well, that the day I lost my wife, my life was over. But he never made us feel that way. He went about his normal life, doing whatever he used to do, going on holidays, meeting people, having fun. But within him, he just felt that, he'd lost his soulmate. So in some ways, he felt that that was the end of his life for him. But he never made us feel like that.
Yeah, that's really incredible. Very generous on his part also, and sensitive. So I'll just ask you a rapid fire round, because those are the kind of things that are very popular these days. 3 words to describe your father, and you get to have 3 each, not 1 each.
I would say honest and caring, outspoken.
That's 3.
No, honest and caring is 1
Okay,
in my
fine.
mind.
Really? Give her. She's the youngest. She's allowed.
Outspoken and passionate.
Amazing. Okay.
Courageous, compassionate, confident.
So to make it memorable, the F in father for me, first of all stood for focus. This I will never forget. Secondly, for fearless. And third, for fun, because as you said, he used to be the fun of parties and events and dinners and everything. So focus, fearless and fun. That's 3 words.
But said in so many sentences. I didn't take so many sentences.
So I got it right.
Yeah, you got it right.
All of you did well. Since I'm giving mark sheets over here, I'd give all of you A+.
We all get our coffee hampers.
Yeah, you get your coffee hamper. The most important lesson you learned from him in 1 line.
I think for me, it was to look beyond myself and to be honest to myself. He always looked beyond himself towards his family, his friends, and for society at large, for the common man. And that's why after his passing, the kind of messages we've all received from people we didn't know so well and people who hadn't even physically met him, but they all felt that he stood up for them and that he was looking out for them. In some way or the other, they felt it was a personal loss for them as well. So for people to have that kind of feeling, so it was his way of just looking out for everybody and looking beyond himself and being just honest to himself.
Great.
I would say live your life fully in every sense. And so much so that just the New Year's Eve before this current one, it was COVID time, we just had very few people, 2 or 3 couples over in the evening. And he was with us. And we used to involve him whenever we had our friends over, not just his friends. And he used to tell us, you don't have to do that, I don't want to spoil your party. But our friends used to love chatting with him, debating with him. He used to debate back. And he was with us. We were dancing till 1:30 in the morning. And then everybody got ready to go back home. And he looked at them and said, Bas, ho gaya. So he lived his life fully in every sense.
Yeah, really a life well lived completely.
You know, Aparna, if you visit our Chakan plant, you will see a sign at first which says, we are proud of our nation and we work to make our nation proud. You know? And through this book, your mother's book, you will see this theme of someone who put country, industry, society, family ahead of himself. So although he may not have said it in so many words, the message to me was very clear. Life is not about being someone. It is about doing something. You know, he was not. He didn't start off wanting to be Rahul Bajaj and be this and that, and that didn't matter to him at all. What was important was to do something. You know, and that is so important. You know, that so many times we get preoccupied with the result side of things, but to focus on the cause side. And when we talk about passion, hard work, integrity, focus, that is all on the cause side. So his message, the most important message to me was always this: don't worry about being someone, just apply yourself and do something. That was important.
Well, that's Bhagavad Gita 101. So.
Yeah, in a way, yes. Yeah.
Okay, what is he most proud of you individually? What would he be most proud of?
Everything. Why should it be only one thing?
Okay.
No, but what he enjoyed most, I think, about me was the stuff that, let's say, did not come naturally to him, So, for example, engineering came naturally to me, marketing came naturally to me, yoga came naturally to me.
Rajesh, this is not about me.
So modest,
okay.
so modest.
Okay, homeopathy. So, when he saw this, stuff like, I would send him my yoga asanas or share with him stuff on homeopathy. I think that he enjoyed very much because he was not naturally inclined towards those things. His strengths were somewhere else, So I think those were the conversations or exchanges that were very interesting from my point of view.
Sunaina?
I think for me, I just feel he loved me for who I am and as I am, and he was just proud of me for who I was. And I loved spending time with him, and so did he. And I think with me, he felt he could talk about a lot of other things which he couldn't talk to the boys about. I think with them, it was very much more work stuff. With me, we talked a lot about his relationships, his thing with mummy, his, a lot of other softer sides. So I think he felt he could be more honest with me and speak from the heart on a lot of things. And so I made it a point to spend a lot of time with him, come to Pune often, just spend weekends with him after mummy passed away. Even before, I would come to meet her and he'd be there. So I think he really enjoyed that, and the holidays we took together, and I think he just enjoyed that time.
That's nice. I think ultimately that's what we want. I think sometimes we just want to be understood even more than what we want to be loved. You know. So,
I think for me it was the entrepreneurial risk I took coming out under the successful umbrella of Bajaj Auto to go with my colleagues and build out the financial services business. And the success we've been fortunate to have is what made him very proud. And I remember in the last few years, been fortunate to get some awards. He's been there every time, clapping the loudest.
speaking out on some of those occasions also. Thanks so much. Just a last closing message for the biographer, my mother. Would you like to say anything for her?
Well, I have known your mother for almost 40 years, you know. So like I was like really little when I met her first. So first and foremost, I'm saying this now because I've never said it before. I think she's a really wonderful, loving, caring, super person. That's one thing I would say. Two, I have briefly gone through this book, not in detail, and I was amazed at how much stuff was new to me. You know, so the effort that has gone into this book is really remarkable. I mean, I never thought, and let the readers see for themselves. You know, how many things he has collected from the last 50 years and from different parts of the world and put it together as only she can. So I think extraordinary, I would say, a extraordinary book about an extraordinary life. And of course, we are talking about Rahul Bajaj and Hamara Bajaj, right? So you know the line, Buland Bharat ki Buland Tasveer. So to me, this book is Buland Tasveer ki Buland Kahani. You know, that's what this book is about. So I think she's done an extraordinary job of it.
So I think I also got to know your mom when she wrote the Business Maharajas, and Papa was a part of that book, I think in the 80s, in the early 80s. And since then, Papa has talked so much about her, and he was so fond of her, and he thought very highly of her, very highly regarded. If anyone could have written his biography, it had to be only your mom. Only she could do it, the kind of research, the detailed research she's done, and the way the book just flows from one chapter to the other. I think it's written beautifully, and only she could do it, and she did it, and he would be so happy to see it.
So in addition to what both of them have said, and your mother's very much over here, she knows, we know, my father did not want to do this biography. Because he used to say, who wants to know anything about me and my life? It's not been important enough. And some of us pushed him to doing it, but I think it was her determination that eventually made him agree, because he was very comfortable with her and he knew her for such a long time. I also know over the years the number of evenings they've sat down after dinner or after lunch when he spoke about his life. And I used to be there for some time and then get bored and leave. But her complete focus to getting it done, and that's why you can see all the stories over there. And then finally, in the last few months, where both of us have been involved also in the fact checking and making sure that everything has come together, her continued, I would say, high level of detail in seeing that the book finally, when it went into printing, was not only the collection of his life, but as accurate as could be possible. we owe a great deal of gratitude for documenting and now preserving his life.
Thank you. Those are really kind words. They really mean a lot.
Thank you.
So I just want to say thanks for making this happen.
Thank you, Aparna.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
making this happen.
Thank
It's
you.
a really special occasion
Enjoyed it.
and
Thank you.
we'll remember a lot. And thank you to our audience for being here and for being with us on this really very, very special occasion. And we look forward to your support.